Picture this. It's 4:30 in the afternoon on March 15, 1961, at the Parc des Eaux Vives in Geneva. A gunmetal grey coupe has just arrived, barely 20 minutes before its scheduled unveiling. The driver, Bob Berry, has averaged 62 miles per hour from Calais, running flat out whenever possible. Sir William Lyons, Jaguar's founder, greets him with characteristic British understatement. "Good God, Berry, I thought you'd never get here." What happens next changes automotive history forever. To understand why the E-Type became what it did, we need to step back and understand the world it entered. 1961 was a pivotal year. John F. Kennedy had just been inaugurated as America's youngest president. The Berlin Wall would rise that August. Britain was emerging from post-war austerity, and the automotive landscape was dominated by Italian exotics that cost fortunes and British sports cars that couldn't match their performance. At the Geneva Motor Show, the E-Type Roadster sold for just £2,097, while the coupe cost £2,196. Ferrari's comparable offerings cost nearly 3 times as much. Aston Martin's were twice the price. This wasn't just a sports car launch, it was a declaration that world-class performance didn't require an Italian bank account. But here's what most people don't know. The E-Type that stunned Geneva almost didn't happen. The development story is filled with engineering compromises, last-minute changes, and decisions that would haunt owners for years, yet somehow resulted in what many still consider the most beautiful car ever made. You think you know the E-Type? Let's talk about what really happened behind those famous louvers. Fact 1. The man who drew with mathematics. Malcolm Gilbert Sayer wasn't a car stylist, he was an aircraft aerodynamicist who worked at Bristol Aeroplane Company during World War II. This distinction mattered enormously. When most designers in 1961 were still sketching shapes they thought looked fast, Sayer was calculating shapes that actually were fast. Born in Cromer, Norfolk, in 1916, Sayer won the prestigious Empire Scholarship at age 17 and attended Loughborough College, earning first-class honours in aeronautical and automotive engineering. After the war, he spent time in Iraq working on vehicle maintenance, an experience that refined his understanding of how things actually worked in the real world, not just on paper. When Sayer joined Jaguar in September 1950, he brought something the automotive world had rarely seen, the ability to mathematically calculate aerodynamic efficiency. He would later describe himself as an aerodynamicist, not a stylist, allegedly adding, "I'm not a hairdresser," when someone referred to him as a designer. Here's what made him revolutionary. Sayer used wind tunnel testing of scale models, often at 1/8 scale, to refine aerodynamics. Then, he applied advanced mathematics to create the final forms. Every curve on the E-Type served a functional purpose. That long bonnet? It wasn't just for looks, it was shaped to let air flow smoothly over the car at high speeds. Those covered headlights? They reduced drag significantly compared to exposed units. The C-Type won Le Mans in 1951 and 1953. The D-Type followed, becoming one of the most successful racing cars of all time, winning Le Mans in 1955, 1956, and 1957. On the Mulsanne Straight, the D-Type could achieve a speed of 192.4 miles per hour. That kind of success doesn't happen by accident, it happens through rigorous mathematical application of aerodynamic principles. Fact 2. The prototypes nobody talks about. Work on what would become the E-Type began with initial sketches by Malcolm Sayer in late 1956. But between those first drawings and the production car sat 2 critical prototypes that most people have never heard about, E1A and E2A. By May 1957, the first prototype, designated E1A, was completed. This aluminum-constructed vehicle measured approximately 14 feet 2 inches in length, smaller than the eventual production E-Type. Initially powered by a 2.4-litre XK engine producing 120 brake horsepower, it was later fitted with the 3.8-litre version. E1A tested the fundamental concept. Could they take D-Type racing technology and make it work for a road car? The car was used for extensive testing of steering, brakes, and suspension, and unusually for a development vehicle, was shown to a journalist and used on public roads. E1A was scrapped in late 1959, but it had proven the concept viable. Then came E2A, and here's where things get interesting. Unlike E1A, which was constructed from aluminum, E2A was built with a steel chassis and aluminum body. This car was completed as a racing car because Jaguar's legendary Bill Haynes and Bob Knight thought it would provide a better testing ground. E2A used a 3-liter version of the XK engine with Lucas fuel injection. After competing at Le Mans in 1960, E2A was shipped to America for racing by Jaguar privateer Briggs Cunningham, then returned to Jaguar in 1961 as a test vehicle. The car nearly ended up scrapped but was saved by Roger Woodley, Jaguar's customer competition manager. In 2008, E2A sold at Bonham's Quail auction for $4,957,000. Not bad for something that almost went to the crusher. Fact 3. The gearbox nobody wanted. Here's something that will surprise you. The E-Type launched with a gearbox that Jaguar knew was inadequate, and they did it anyway. The 4-speed Moss gearbox had synchromesh on the 3 upper gears but not on first. For the younger viewers, that means you couldn't simply push the clutch and slot it into first gear from second. You had to double clutch pushing the clutch, moving to neutral, releasing the clutch, blipping the throttle to match revs, then pushing the clutch again and selecting first. Miss the timing, and you'd get a grinding crunch that made passengers wince. Why would Jaguar fit such a gearbox to their revolutionary new sports car? 2 reasons: availability and cost. The Moss Gear Company had been supplying Jaguar since 1949, and the gearbox was used in everything from Morgan sports cars to military vehicles. It was proven, tough, and critically it was available in the quantities Jaguar needed. But here's what really happened. Period road testers specifically criticized the transmission, with some stating that the gearbox was definitely not on a par with the performance of the car as a whole, and that they didn't like it. The lever often balked, going into first, and grated, going into other. Forward ratios, particularly during fast shifts. Jaguar was already developing an all-synchromesh gearbox during the E-Type's development. They knew the Moss box was a compromise. But launching the E-Type required getting cars to customers, and the Moss transmission was what they could get. It wouldn't be until October 1964 that the 4.2-liter engine arrived with an all-synchromesh Jaguar-designed 4-speed gearbox. The irony? The Moss box is incredibly strong and essentially indestructible. Today, trying to restore one is nearly impossible because new parts aren't available, but they rarely need restoration because they simply don't break. Enthusiasts who learned to double clutch properly often preferred the mechanical precision of the Moss box over the later all-synchro unit. Fact 4. The flat floor mystery. The first 500 cars made in 1961 and early 1962 are different from later production cars by having early details such as outside bonnet latches and a fully spot-welded bonnet with a separate louvre panel, but the real distinguishing feature was invisible from the outside, the flat floor. Unlike later E-Types, these early cars had no recessed footwells. The floor was completely flat from front to back. Sounds trivial? It wasn't. Taller drivers found the driving position cramped, with limited legroom and a clutch pedal that required awkward ankle angles. By January 1962, footwells were added to improve comfort, with the change appearing around right-hand drive Roadster, chassis number 358, and left-hand drive number 582. A total of 2,616 E-Types were built with flat floors, representing 19.8% of all 6-cylinder E-Types. Why does this matter? Because those flat floor cars, the ones that were less comfortable to drive, are now among the most valuable E-Types ever made. A 3.8-liter 1961 flat floor Series 1 sold for $528,000 in 2014. Of the flat floor cars, only 385 left-hand drive Roadsters were built with external bonnet latches. These early cars also featured other now desirable quirks: leather upholstered bucket seats and an aluminum-trimmed center instrument panel and console. From 1963 onward, Jaguar switched to vinyl and leather trim. That aluminum dash became a defining feature of the most collectible E-Types. Fact 5. The night nobody slept. The Geneva Motor Show story you've heard is only half true. Yes, Bob Berry drove 9 600 HP from Coventry on March 14th, arriving with just 20 minutes to spare. But that famous grey coupe couldn't handle what happened next. Bob Berry was giving journalists demonstration runs up a nearby hill climb course, but queues were building, and there was no way he could satisfy demand. Sir William Lyons made a phone call back to Coventry, "Get Norman Dewis, the test driver, and bring the Roadster." Immediately. Norman Dewis was at the Motor Industry Research Association test track with 77RW, working on the brakes, when he got the urgent summons around 2 in the afternoon. William Haynes and Bob Knight told him he needed to be in Geneva by 10 the next morning, a journey of more than 600 miles. Here's what makes this remarkable. Dewis suggested going home for rest while they removed testing equipment, then picking up the car in the morning. But Haynes said no, he'd go when the car was ready. Catching the 10 p.m. ferry at Dover. No overnight bag, no preparation, just drive. The car Dewis drove was 77RW, built in February 1961 as the first production open two-seater. Dewis completed the journey in approximately 17 hours. No GPS, no motorway services every 20 miles. Just Norman Dewis, a green roadster, and the darkness of a French night. When Dewis arrived in Geneva, Sir William Lyons looked at his watch and simply said, "Thought you'd do it, Dewis." That was the extent of the praise. Then Lofty England, Jaguar's service manager, gave him a hug and said, "We worked your speed out, and we never thought you'd make it." But here's the kicker. Dewis asked where his hotel was because he was keen to get some sleep, and England told him he had to start giving demonstrations with Bob Berry immediately. Imagine, you've just driven through the night, averaged well over 80 miles per hour across France, and you're told to get in the car and start racing up a hill climb for journalists. By the end of the Geneva Motor Show, Jaguar had over 500 pre-orders. Fact 6. The 150 miles per hour controversy. The E-Types claimed 150 miles per hour top speed was a defining part of its legend. But could it actually do it? The answer is more complicated than you think. 9 600 HP, the grey coupe from Geneva, was fitted with an experimental engine to achieve the magic 150 miles per hour during testing. An open 3.8-litre car tested by the British magazine Motor in 1961 had a top speed of 149.1 miles per hour. Close, but not quite the claimed figure. When Car and Driver tested an E-Type Roadster for their road research report, they achieved 145 miles per hour, with luggage in the trunk and the top down. They noted that achieving top speed was complicated by the lack of an unlimited stretch of road and having one tester sitting on the seat back to photograph the instrument panel while at speed. Here's what happened. The cars submitted for road tests by motoring journals were prepared by the Jaguar works, with work including engine balancing and subtle tuning such as gas flowing the cylinder heads. Both well-known 1961 road test cars, the E-Type Coupe 9600 HP and convertible 77RW, were fitted with Dunlop racing tyres on test, which had a larger rolling diameter and lower drag coefficient. Was this cheating? Not really, but it wasn't representative of what customers received either. The production 3.8-litre E-Type, with its standard tyres and unstage-tuned engine, would typically achieve somewhere between 140 and 145 miles per hour. Still phenomenally fast for 1961, but not the mythical 150. The engine itself was impressive regardless of top-speed controversy. The 3.8-litre XK engine used an 87mm bore and 106mm stroke for a total displacement of 3,781 cubic centimeters. With triple SU carburetors, it produced 265 brake horsepower at 5,500 revolutions per minute and 260 pound-feet of torque at 4,000 revolutions per minute. Fact 7. The brake system everyone got wrong. The E-Type featured four-wheel disc brakes at a time when this was cutting-edge technology. But here's what the magazines rarely told you. The brake system was unnecessarily complex, often troublesome, and required specific knowledge to maintain properly. The rear brakes were mounted inboard, next to the differential. This wasn't just for show. Mounting the rear disc brakes inboard reduced unsprung weight. In theory, this improved handling and ride quality. In practice, it made the brakes incredibly difficult to service. Early E-Types had Dunlop brakes without servo assistance. Owners reported that with stock 3.8 brakes, full pedal pressure was needed to slow the car down. The 4.2-litre models received improved servo-assisted brakes, but even these required careful maintenance. The brake system used a complex master cylinder with multiple chambers and a reaction valve components that were advanced for their time but required specific expertise to service correctly. Period mechanics, who were used to simple drum brake systems, often struggled with the E-Type setup. Modern classic car owners still debate whether to upgrade to later brake systems or maintain original specification. But here's the thing, when properly maintained, the brakes worked. They had to stopping a car capable of 150 miles per hour required serious engineering. The complexity wasn't unnecessary, it was essential for the performance Jaguar promised. So, what did Jaguar actually build in 1961? They built a car that could embarrass Ferraris at a fraction of the cost. They built a car that looked like nothing else on earth. And they built it with compromises, a gearbox that frustrated drivers, flaws that cramped tall pilots, and brake systems that confused mechanics. Production lasted until 1974, with 72,000 cars being produced across all series. The E-Type went through 3 series, gained 2+2 seating, received a 4.2-litre engine, and eventually got a V12. But those early cars, the ones built while Malcolm Sayer was still refining his mathematical approach to beauty, remain the purest expression of what the E-Type was meant to be. The flat-floor cars that sold for £2,000 in 1961 now command $500,000. Norman Dewis's overnight drive became legend, and that grey coupe, 9600 HP, it's now considered the oldest surviving E-Type and played a key role in the E-Type's launch. What never gets discussed is this. The E-Type succeeded not despite its compromises, but because Jaguar understood which compromises mattered. A bulky gearbox that required skill? Acceptable. Cramped footwells in early cars? Fixable in later production. But compromising on that shape on Malcolm Sayer's mathematically perfect aerodynamic form? Never. If you owned one of these cars back in the day, I want to hear about it in the comments. What was it really like to live with a flat-floor E-Type? Did you master the double-clutch technique on that Moss gearbox? And for those of you who've driven one recently, how does it compare to what you expected? If you found these facts interesting, hit that subscribe button. We're diving deep into the cars that defined the 60s, and next week, we're talking about another British icon that nobody tells the full story about. Thanks for watching, and remember, the most beautiful car ever made wasn't perfect. It was just perfectly imperfect in all the right ways.